around. So they took it in good humour. And what do I make of it? Where it really came from. They've left it mysterious, and it's supposed to be the accurate history of the galaxy, basically, or whatever. But it's also meant to be read metaphorically, a bit like the Bible, where some people say there's symbolism built into it, and there's allegedly layers of stuff in it. But the only thing is, my thought would be, but if you don't get that reading it, it's pointless, really, isn't it? It's got to be accessible as well.
Okay.
But anyway.
Let's just
Okay.
jump in while we've got light. So can you tell us a bit about yourself? When did you first notice crop circles?
Well, I've been involved in crop circles from about 1991. And it was the summer of 1991, and I was down in the West Country, came to Wiltshire, just holidaying basically, and there were crop circles. And I had heard of crop circles, but had never actually seen them. And as soon as I saw the very first crop circle, I knew I was hooked. Can't explain really, but it gave me a feeling in here that something had changed. And from that moment, I became fascinated to know why we weren't hearing more about it. I wanted to know where they came from, same as everybody else did, and nobody could tell me. And then I discovered that they were appearing in the county in England where I live, which is in Sussex. And then I became involved with a bunch of people investigating them there. And from there began the evolution to where I am today.
For someone who's never been in a crop circle, or even seen one, can you explain a crop circle to me?
Well, crop circles have been appearing for actually centuries, it would seem, and they began as simple circular markings, and then more and more of them seem to have arrived over the centuries. And it's only really in the last 30 years that they've began to evolve in complexity, and they began to form rings and then multiple circles. But then, in 1990, there was a sudden explosion of new complexity. We had what they called the pictograms, very symbolic looking designs, and we're basically talking plants that have been laid flat in a field. It's that straightforward. And yet, over the years, the designs have become more and more complex. They've risen in number as the years have gone by. And there's so much fascination with them because nobody really knows where they come from, how they are made, or what they mean. And it's that absence of an answer that's kept people fascinated for all these years.
Can you tell us what are some of the most interesting features of the circles for you, to your mind?
I think you need to look at crop circles from a sort of multi-layered way. You have, obviously, the pattern, the look of it, the symbolism. They will sing to different people in different ways. One pattern that means something to somebody won't touch the next person, They're very, very individual. So you have that response just to the shape, and I will have that the same as everybody else. But I'm also quite interested in the forensics of crop circles. How is the crop laid down? Is it very messy? Is it very neat? Is there any evidence of regular damage? If there isn't, how has this been laid flat? There's that side of it. Then you can go further. There is the biological analysis, where people over the years have done plant sample analysis and discovered effectively biological changes going on inside these plants that can't really be simply answered. So there's all these different layers, plus you've got the geometry, the mathematics of formations, which some people think's the biggest message of all. And then you've got all the strange peripheral phenomena, balls of light, strange sounds, incredible sightings in and around them. Now it's making all that join up to see where the big picture lies that the fun comes. So each person can focus on one aspect and get many things out of it, but I think you have to bring them together as a whole to really appreciate what's going on.
What would you say to someone who says it's Doug and Dave?
When people say all crop circles are made by those two old blokes, Doug and Dave, the first thing we say today is, well, one of them's been dead for over 10 years, so it's probably not him now. Even at the time, I remember I just got into crop circles the summer before that, suddenly happened, and even at the time I knew this cannot possibly answer, this mystery. and the formations they made for cameras were very unimpressive, very messy. They really bore no resemblance to the level of complexity that we had been used to seeing and that they were claiming by insinuation. And really, it soon became clear they simply couldn't have made more than a small number of formations. But I think the reason why that story has stuck in the public consciousness is because it was fun, it was controversial, it was classic media fodder, it was the silly season story of the decade. And basically, when you look back on it now, you can't believe why anybody took it seriously. And yet that story stuck in the public mind, and still today some people will say, it's those two old blokes. And then you have to tell them the real story. How are you getting on with the sound? Is that going to be all right?
That's fine.
Yeah, it's okay. All right, good.
You're killing it, man.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So everyone looking out for the phone. If it's Jaime, talk to him, would you? Thanks. Mad rush. Okay. Moving on. We good?
Yeah.
Would you say crop circles have changed your life? Do you feel differently now than you did before?
I think everybody I know has had their lives changed by crop circles, those who are involved with it, because it's impossible for that not to happen, and I'm just the same. Because as soon as you start trying to answer the mystery, you're having to ask questions that maybe you never asked before about the whole basic nature of reality. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things of all about crop circles, is that they make you look at the whole universe with new eyes. If you're going to say, well, this doesn't come from any mundane source, you've then got to look at the non-mundane sources, and of course that could be one of a zillion things. And the next thing you know, you're talking about extraterrestrials, you're talking about natural energies, you're talking about consciousness. And I mean, I, for one, although I was interested in unusual things, it wasn't until I came into the crop circles that I ever had to confront those issues within myself. And as a result, I mean, they've taken me off into a whole other world, and I'm now, involved in researching mysteries per se, and looking at the whole global agenda, all of this kind of stuff, mysteries and cover-ups, only because of the crop circles. And I think when you look at many people involved in them, they've been taken on to different levels of life that they never would have been involved in without them. So yes, crop circles, wherever they come from, they change lives, and that's a fact.
You mentioned it opened up a whole new universe. Can you talk about some of the biggest revelations that have come from crop circles?
Do you mean personally or generally?
Both, but first personally.
Okay. I think personally, for me, what the crop circles revealed was that actually we are living in a world that we pretend we understand, and we don't. And here's the thing, that for all the debunking that we've had over the years, and of course there has been much, for all the 80% of people who may believe they're all man-made, you have still got this mystery persisting after all these years, and even the public can't quite bring themselves to completely ignore the phenomenon. That's why crop circles still appear in newspapers from time to time, because there's a fascination with something that refuses to be easily answered. And so it reminds us all that, yeah, we don't understand the world around us. There are mysteries, there are things we just cannot pin down. It doesn't matter how many opinions there are. You have to find evidence, and you need to look at that evidence. And of course, most of the debunking of crop circles is based not on evidence, but on hearsay, and very often propaganda.
Let's assume we're talking about the real circle makers. What do you think their message is to us?
It's often said there must be a message to the crop circles, but I'm not sure that there is one coherent message. Because it strikes me that if this phenomenon wanted to speak clearly, it could do. And there have been one or two formations over the years, like the alien and the disk formation of 2002, which had a disk of binary code, which actually decoded into a straightforward message. a warning, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. So that was very literal. That's unusual. Most of the formations are very ambiguous. You can't really be sure what they mean. Some are astronomical. They give astronomical data, which have given dates and times, which have been fascinating. But most of them are a mishmash of multicultural symbolism, some old, some new. Now, how do you make sense of that? If they wanted to speak one message, they would do so, and they choose not to. And that says to me one of two things. Either they don't want to be coherent, or they are coming from several different sources with different agendas, or maybe even both. I think what's going on with the phenomenon from the point of view of what is it saying to us, most of all, it says to me they're waking people up. They're nudging people in the ribs, collectively, to look around them more at the world that is around them in a far deeper way. Now, maybe that's all they're meant to do, and maybe they are deliberately left obscure so that we don't understand them, because that's when the evolution of consciousness begins. If written next to every formation was a message saying what it meant, how it was made, where it came from, we'd go, oh, all right, and we go back to sleep. It's the unknowing, it's the mystery of it that's the most beautiful thing of all, because then we have to reach more deeply within ourselves to find the answer. And it strikes me that's what's going on here. It's almost as if they're trying to stimulate us with obscure symbols. They occasionally speak clearly, almost just to upset the apple cart. Then it's back to mysterious stuff again. So the message, well, I don't think we know what it is, but what we have collectively received is wake up. For whatever, whether it be about the 2012 prophecies or global change or climate change, whatever, it still happened. And people are waking up because of crop circles, and that has to serve some positive function somewhere. So from that point of view, they've been useful.
We often find them, it's almost like they're pointing to these ancient sites, these much older sites.
No, go ahead, ask the question while I do this.
There's much older sites like Stonehenge, Avebury in particular, Silbury Hill. Do you think that they're trying to tell us something about our past as well by reference to these sites?
Say when? Okay. The connection between crop circles and ancient sites, I think maybe there's two reasons for that, because many crop formations cluster around stone circles, burial mounds, ancient sacred places. Now, those that believe in earth energies, dowsable, detectable energies in the ground, most of them believe that ancient man was instinctively aware of these natural energies. They were drawn to places that were strong in them. That's why they placed their sites where they did. Now, if crop circles are utilizing the same energy to be created, as many people believe, it would stand to reason that they would cluster in these same areas as the ancient sites, because that's where the natural energy is. They are hotspots. And that makes total sense to me. But there is another way to argue it round, which is that some people believe the formations are deliberately trying to draw our attention to certain places. And the fact that here in Wiltshire, where we have, more crop circles than anywhere else in the world, we also have some of the most important ancient sites in the world. You've got Avebury, you've got Stonehenge. It's drawn consciousness back to something bigger than ourselves. Those things that motivated people to put up huge stones and build these incredible mounds like Silbury Hill. It's almost like it's trying to remind us there are bigger things than the materialistic world that we spin around us. And maybe there's a message in that too. They're drawing our attention to these places, maybe to bring us back to some deeper level that we've lost. Although I could be wrong.
Would you say, looking at the designs over the years, from, let's say, 1991 to present, do you see an evolution there? And do you see a progression at all?
People often say, are the crop circles more complex now than they were? Now, obviously, if you go back to the 1980s, they're certainly more complex than they were then. But I think certainly the last 10 years, from the late 90s onwards, what we've seen really is not more complexity, but an exploration of different designs, different genres, different symbolism, really, which are as equally complex as each other, but going for different things. So it's almost as if each year now you have a slightly different theme. This year, for instance, we've seen quite a lot of life forms, dragonflies, jellyfish, very pictorial stuff in the fields. Other years we've had more astronomical data. We've had star charts, galaxies, seemingly solar symbolism. Um, Other years it'll be very mathematical, they'll repeat certain themes. So there has been a progression from the point of view of they seem to feed us something slightly new each year, but I think that it's part of a wider whole. I'm not sure that it's a straight curve up in complexity. It does this. They take us where they want to take us each year, depending on whatever agenda they obviously think is important for us in any given year. But certainly 1990 was the year. 1990 was the year where we saw the first real explosion of complexity. And, certainly it has stepped up from there. And what's nice is that every year now you think, well, they've surely done it all. They can't give us anything we didn't expect. But they always do. And always these shapes will come up with something that we never expected and will take us on somewhere new, which is, of course, one of the most exciting and beautiful things about it.
Tough question here. Who are the circle makers?
Well, the mystery of what makes crop circles is, of course, seemingly the most simple question. People always say, well, what makes crop circles? Well, the answer is we don't know. And it's the hardest thing of all to answer. Now, you have to conclude looking at them that there is some level of consciousness involved. Now, nature can produce some complex shapes, like the fractal designs that we've had, the chaos theory patterns. So maybe some of the more complex ones could be natural in origin. But others, like with clear messages or, clear pictorial symbolism, this denotes consciousness. Now, whether that consciousness arises from an external source, be it extraterrestrials, extra-dimensionals, call them what you will, or whether that consciousness comes from within us, I think is open to debate. Now, I was involved back in the mid-1990s with a series of experiments where we tried to psychically interact by requesting shapes, trying to make them appear using meditations, things like this. Now, we had a successful experiment where the shape that we had hoped to, be created was created. Now, we cannot see any way that anybody could have known what shape we'd chosen, that we could have been tricked. And other groups have done it. Other groups have chosen shapes that they've wanted to appear, seemingly psychically interacted, and these shapes have arrived. Now, that raises the prospect that even if there is some external force, our own consciousness may play a role, some part of whatever wider process is going on here. And I think certainly that cannot be dismissed. Plus also, when you look at the natural forces that do exist that maybe could create patterns by themselves, maybe there is a force in nature which can be influenced by consciousness, whether it's extraterrestrial, us, whatever it may be, that it's nudging this natural mechanism for making circles into creating more complexity. But it can happen in different ways at different times, all of which means that answering the simple question, what makes crop circles, can't be simply answered. I think it will be an amalgamation of all these different theories, would really be the only thing that would make sense of everything at the end of the day. Picking just one theory in isolation never really seems to work, because it never seems to answer every question about it. And so therefore we need to be broad-minded and look at everything and stir it into a big pot. Maybe eventually some sort of unified answer will arise, but I don't think we're really near that stage yet of really understanding it.
If we consider crop circles to be a conversation, do you think this is the first time we've had this conversation as humans?
There are some people that think crop circles may have appeared in sort of ancient times. I mean, if you look at the geometry of stone circles and the layouts of stones, some of them follow the same principles as crop circles. And people like George Terence Meaden, I mean, he believes that ancient man did find crop circles and they marked them with the stones. Well, we can never prove that, but it's certainly an idea. So therefore, maybe crop formations arrive at different times in history when they're needed. And they'll come and they'll go, or go back to a background level, and they'll well up again at some other important point in human history, maybe. And the analogy that's often made is, Stanley Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey. The huge black monolith appears, and every time it appears, it leaps humankind forward in its evolution. Well, maybe that's what the crop circles are doing. Every time we need a little nudge forward, they arrive. We never understand them. We don't really know where they come from, but they stimulate growth of evolution. So maybe this is just one stage, and then we'll get through this, whatever happens, good, bad, otherwise, and then maybe they'll come back again in a few thousand years' time, probably when we've forgotten them all over again. So this is a nice idea, but obviously we can't prove it, but in a way it doesn't matter, and in a way where they come from doesn't really matter. I think it matters on the level of, obviously, if you're going to say they're all man-made, that instantly switches people off. Then they're not interested, it's just a joke. So from that point of view it matters, but from the slightly more esoteric point of view, whether they're made by extra-dimensionals, extraterrestrials, us, whatever, in a way that doesn't matter. The patterns are stimulating a growth of consciousness. And that's been the most important thing of all. That's been a gift. And they have also brought grace and beauty and mystery back into people's lives for a short time. Now, how many things do that? Certainly not watching soaps on TV, There's something about these things that have taken people to a deeper level. And that's been the greatest gift of all, regardless of their origins.
Some people have posited that there might be a technology being described by the circles. What do you think of that?
Some researchers have believed that the formations that we see are effectively two-dimensional representations of three-dimensional objects, and that if we could learn to create these three-dimensional objects, they might actually be showing us a new technology, be it anti-gravity, be it free energy or whatever. And certainly, I mean, there's some people like Doug Ruby was a chap a few years ago who believed they were showing us new propulsion systems that would use clean energy. Now, who knows? There are interesting ideas that come out of that. I'm willing to believe this may be a part of it. On the other hand, if it's just accidental that it's stimulating people to create free energy devices or whatever it may be, well, hey, the result's still the same, which is rather nice. But certainly, it can't be ruled out that if we could decode some of this stuff, however obscure or deliberately obscure it might be, it might lead us on to some new technology that maybe is actually, it's a blueprint, but we're just not recognizing it for what it is. But I do think that can only be true of some formations and not all of them. Some clearly are coming from some other direction of thought.
Do you think, if I were to ask you, if I were to be a skeptic, what's the one formation you could give me that is definitive proof that there is a phenomena here?
Picking out one formation as the definitive proof that all formations are not man-made is quite tricky, because each person you speak to will have a different take on that formation. And it doesn't matter how much irrefutable proof you think you've got in one formation, somebody else will come along and say the opposite. So therefore, the one that I think has mattered most to me personally is quite an obscure formation, which was the one that appeared as a direct result, we believe, of our psychic interaction experiment. Because we don't see how anybody could have known what that pattern was. Even if you say somebody went out and made it, how they tuned into something, it's something bigger. It's still an amazing phenomenon that occurred. And there were other things that occurred during our work that seemed to us to be interaction. For instance, the very first day that we met to discuss the plans that we were going to do, the first formation in the county of Sussex that year, which was 1993, appeared in the field as close as you could get to the house we were in. Nobody outside of our very small, tight-knit group knew that we were doing that. We trusted each other. Nobody would have gone out there and done that. So many little things like that seem to say there's something tuning in here. And when finally we did this big experiment and then we got the exact design we wanted, I think we all felt personally satisfied. There was something that could not be explained by any mundane means. Now, that's our personal experience. There are other formations which are very big, very complex, which some people say, well, there's no way that could be man-made. Maybe they're right. But of course, that's always going to be open to the skeptics just throwing a brickbat bat and saying, oh, yes, but, and the arguments go on forever. I think some of the other more important ones are the ones where you have eyewitnesses. Now, I mean, I've interviewed a few eyewitnesses to crop circles appearing over the years. They've always struck me as credible. They've always struck me as people with quite a lot to lose, actually, by going on the record. One chap was a college lecturer, and he and his family were present when a circle formed back in, I think, 1991. He was embarrassed by the whole thing. He didn't want it to happen. He never talked about it for a few years because he feared ridicule. And it was only when he happened to mention it to a colleague and then the story came back to us that he agreed reluctantly to go on the record. And yet what he described fitted in with the other eyewitness accounts. So you could argue that's an obscure formation. Nobody remembers it, it's not big, it's not complex. And yet there you have a man and his family who were present when it formed in front of them. Things like that. I have to say, well, those are the ones that say to me that we should be concentrating on. It doesn't matter how many formations are man-made. If you can show that a significant proportion are not man-made, then you've got a significant mystery that needs to be investigated. And that's why I think all these arguments about what percentage of formations are man-made, these arguments go round and round. It's almost irrelevant. What you should say is, what percentage of formations seem to have evidence that can't be described by the man-made method? Let's look at those ones, not the other way round. And even if you only come up with a handful of formations where you have eyewitnesses or significant biological analysis or, some evidence of interaction that seems beyond any explicable explanation, what we're left with then is a serious body still of formations. And then you can extrapolate from that the likelihood of many others also being beyond human means. We all accept there are man-made formations. Maybe there are many, but maybe there have also been quite a few formations which those people cannot explain. And those are the ones that I think we should be concentrating on.
Why is mainstream academia so terrified of examining the crop circle?
Just let the footsteps go. Are these answers a bit long, by the way? Is this okay?
No,
you can shred these as you need, yeah? Okay. All right.
Right, are we losing light? Yeah. Okay, so we'll have to wrap it up soon. Why is mainstream academia so terrified of crop circles and examining them?
The problem that we have with the world of the academic not wanting to engage with crop circles, I think, is, as much as anything, they fear ridicule. Now, we know there are some, academics who are actually quite interested, but they cannot admit it to their peer group because there's so much stigma in the media that's been put about, to do with crop circles, that regardless of what they think is serious evidence, whether it be biological analysis, geometrical analysis, they are still afraid of the reaction they are going to get. And so, because they don't want to stand out from the crowd, they don't want to lose their funding, or whatever it may be, they keep quiet. But also, you then get this knock-on effect where some academics basically will then dismiss anything that doesn't fit with their model of the universe because they don't want it challenged. I think we see this quite often. I think we have people who basically are so set that they've written the physics books, this is how it must be. Anything, and if you accept that even one crop formation is not man-made, you're upsetting that apple cart. Anything which changes that is upsetting to them, and they're going to blinker it off and pretend it's not going on. And I think we have that going on too, which is a shame, because of course it's the academics that could really be helpful to us here. But I think it's always going to be the way that as soon as you start to investigate something like crop circles, you will be dismissed as fringe. It's like global warming sort of challenges. These people can be high-level scientists, respected. As soon as they challenge the accepted official model, suddenly they're maverick. Suddenly they're fringe. Suddenly nobody ever took them seriously, which of course isn't true. But that's how they're dealt with, and then they can be quietly sidelined and forgotten. It's the same with crop circles.
Just what they said, very articulate.
We're back.
Okay.
So where are we going in the future with this phenomena, and then closing comments?
Okay. If the crop circles are something to do with heralding a time of change, it stands to reason that as we get closer to that time of change, either they will start to really blossom into something which can't be ignored, or they will decide they've done their task and fall away again. Now, if it is to do with, say, the year 2012, of which there's been much speculation due to the ancient prophecies, if it is to do with that, I think we could expect post-2012 for the phenomenon either to vanish or to certainly tail off. And maybe we'll still be none the wiser as to why the formations were here. But maybe that won't matter, because if it's their task just to stimulate, awareness, to wake people up, once they've done that, it won't matter to them whether we ever really understand where they came from. If that's not their aim, it doesn't matter. And maybe when we've gone through whatever time of change we've got to go through, we may find ourselves looking back in 100 years' time culturally thinking, what was that all about? And they'll look back at, the end of the 20th, beginning of the 21st century, at this curious but fascinating phenomenon as just some strange little sliver of history that we never really got to the bottom of. We never understood it, but it made a difference. And I think somewhere down the line it will be recognised that those people who were changed by crop circles had a little and yet significant domino effect on lots of other people. Because some people say crop circles can't change the world, there's not enough people interested, it's too small a percentage. And yet, when you look at the effect they've had on people's lives, and those people have gone on to be big in science or politics or whatever it is, human rights even, then that's where you'll see the effect, and they've played their part. Crop circles, I think, are just one thing going on. They're not existing in isolation. You have messages coming through from people who claim to have been abducted by extraterrestrials. You have channeled messages coming through. You've got ancient prophecies coming to light. There's something welling up in the collective. It's all to do with change and shift of consciousness. And I recognize crop circles are just one tiny part of that tapestry, but they've been a significant and very visually overt part of that. And in time to come, we will look back on these times, and the crop circles will be seen as the emblems of those times of change because they're so unforgettably, stunningly visual. But whether we will ever grasp what it was all about, I think is open to question. For me, I think the bottom line with crop circles is that they have come at a time when people needed to step out of their very narrow materialistic views. And I think we've been culturally brainwashed into being diverted just into that view. We're flesh and blood, we're nothing more. The only thing that will give you your fix is your next shopping trip. What the crop circles have done is suddenly opened up a whole avenue, if nothing else, to the value of beauty and the value of mystery. And I think the mystery of crop circles has been one of the most wonderful things of all, because it's made the phenomenon inclusive. Nobody can point the finger and say, you're wrong and I'm right. I know what crop circles are. Nobody can do that. Neither the mystic nor the skeptic can absolutely prove what they're saying. And hallelujah. For once you have a level playing field where everybody can meet in the middle, nobody's superior, and people gather and people come to crop circles and find themselves interacting with humanity on a whole other level that they might not have done without crop circles. And that, to me, will always be the biggest gift of all.
I can't push it anymore. We can do more like audio stuff, or I mean, I wish we could. It's just we didn't start.
Well, you did quite well because it's really dark, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank God for modern camera technology, eh?